Right, hello and welcome to another live author interview brought to you by Booktrib, the leading source for book news and reviews. My name is Chelsea Ciccone. I am an editor at Booktrib, and today I'm delighted to be joined by author Tim Darcy Ellis, the author of acclaimed debut novel, The Secret Diaries of Juan Luis Vives. So thank you, Tim, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Chelsea. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so lovely to have you. And I would like to say congratulations. The book was just listed as one of the top 100 indie books of the year by Kirkus. So congratulations, that's fantastic.
Thank you very much. I got that news through yesterday, so that was a really wonderful day. And I also got I've got it here, a little mention in the New York Review of Books yesterday. So it kind of all came at once. So it's been really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. Yeah. So the book follows, as the title would suggest, the Jewish academic and humanist Juan Luis Vives in the 16th century. And he has fled Spain during the Spanish Inquisition. He's living in the Spanish Netherlands. And then his buddy, Sir Thomas More, sort of connects him with the British monarchy, and he's going to be the tutor to Mary I of England, who's the daughter of Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII. He moves to England, and there he sort of gets involved with the underground Jewish community, but he's also sort of walking a very fine line between the king and queen, who want very opposing things, and it's a book full of, a lot of suspense, psychologically speaking, because any wrong move could really mean the end of his life. So I'd like to first start out by saying, that I had never heard of Vives prior to reading your book, and I'm curious how you came across him and what appealed about this person to you, why you would want to write a book dedicated to him.
Oh, sure. I think it's a great question, because most of us haven't actually heard of him, and yet such an important figure during the time, and he said so much that it has actually changed society and the way we do things afterwards. But I was an archaeologist and a historian. I worked at the Museum of London, and I was a tour guide in the medieval galleries at the British Museum, and I loved this Tudor period. But I'd never heard of him until I think about 12 years ago, when I was giving a Spanish friend who lives here a book called The Disinherited, the Exiles. His family had some bother with Franco, so I really wasn't looking at the Tudor or the medieval period. But as I do, because I love books, before I gave the book away, I had a good read through first. And I didn't even want to give it away in the end because it was so fascinating. And I just stumbled across this character, Juan Luis Vives, one of the exiles from Spain, who was born in 1492 in Valencia, which was the year of the Decree of Alhambra, where the Jews were basically banned from practicing or from living in Spain. They were given two choices: either they convert to Christianity or they leave, and I think they were given 2 months to leave. So I then sort of read a little bit about him and some of the ideas that he was advocating for, such as education of women is just as important as education of men, that we should be taking care of our poor through the auspices of the state, creating a census and a register of all people, not just the wealthy, so that we can then train people that weren't in useful work, and then we can make a full analysis of what the situation of poverty is, and start to get people back into the workforce and not begging and living on the street and dying of starvation as they did in those days. He advocated for a League of Nations to bind all the European nations together, and he was a great pacifist. He abhorred the Inquisition and what it had done to his family. But he was a real networker. He wasn't letting any of his sort of social disadvantage, being born to a Jewish family that had basically been outlawed by the Inquisition for generations. And he'd seen members of his family burnt at the stake when he was a boy, his aunt and his cousin, absolutely shocking. And he left Spain when he was 17, and he never went back because he didn't feel safe. But he didn't stop networking and talking to Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, the Pope, the Holy Roman Emperor, and all these really influential people in Europe at the time, because he had this vision to make wasn't that the poor and the sick were taken care of, and women's place in society was assumed in the way that he felt that it should have been, that a woman was as intellectual as a man, and that any society that doesn't support female education is going to suffer and go backwards. So I just thought, wow, you know, I've just this has just slipped through the cracks in my understanding of the history. I'm the one at fault here, but actually he doesn't. I think, and when I've studied it, there are very good reasons why he doesn't crop up. But as soon as I found him, I was looking for the book. I was looking for the film. I was thinking, well, you know, the Spanish do these things really well. You know, I'm thinking there's bound to be a film. But there wasn't, and so I felt, this is the thing that I'm passionate about, and this is what I have to write about. So I got to work.
Yeah, and you know, you've done a fabulous job. I mean, it's really exciting to hear about a historical figure, especially one that crossed paths with so many people that we would have recognized. You know, the King Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, Catherine of Aragon, Thomas More. And to have this person who, you know, brushed elbows with so many people, you know, just not be on our radar. So it's, you know, it feels, you know, completely like a new discovery.
It's really interesting. I mean, he navigated through what. Sorry, Chelsea, but I was going to say, I think one of the reasons is he navigated three worlds: the Jewish world, the Spanish world, and the world. And he was never had his foot fully in one camp. And then, as we can talk about, you know, later, if you like, how he kind of got ostracized from those communities. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to talk about that now. I mean, you know, his family have been a long line of Spanish Jews, and so, you know, his mother, who had died a natural death, she was investigated and found that she'd been visiting a clandestine synagogue. His paternal uncle and aunt and cousin had been operating a fully equipped clandestine synagogue in their house, and they were burnt at the stake. The father was arrested, and what plays out with that is written into the book, and I don't want to give too many spoilers away. But Vives fled Spain, and although the authorities were trying to pull him back into Spain, he never felt safe. And he was offered opportunities, but other people conversed. So people in his situation who went back to Spain, being offered these positions in the universities, went back and then found that they too were arrested and under suspicion. So he left, and because what he was writing about was considered so subversive in its day, the education of women, that the state takes care of the poor and the sick, not the church. That's not a route to get you a seat in heaven. That's, as a humanist and as a humanitarian, that's what we need to be doing in society to further society and to progress, is to take care of minorities and the sick. But this was considered really subversive writing in the 1520s. He had a position at Oxford University, but Cardinal Wolsey banned him in the mid-1520s for his subversive writing. And then back in Europe, in the Catholic lands, the Jesuits banned his writing. A group called the Theologians banned him. The Pope banned him in the later 1560s. And the Inquisition put him on the list of writers that if you even have a book of Vives in your home, then you are going to come under examination of the Inquisition. And as late as 1697, so 200 years after Vives was born, members of his family were still banned from holding office in Spain for fear of being secret Jews. At least that's the line the authorities went with. But in England, he was a great friend of Sir Thomas More, and lived with the More family, first in Bucklersbury in the city, and then in Chelsea. So when I'm doing my research, I've got to get those places right. The years that he was in Bucklersbury and the years in Chelsea, and where they were at court, were they spending Christmas at Windsor or Greenwich? What was the palace? Where were they? Wembley at Oxford? I've got to get that right. But again, Thomas More fell foul of the king. Cardinal Wolsey fell foul of the king. Vives was in this incredibly complex situation where he was tutor to Princess Mary and loyal and a confidant to Catherine of Aragon. But her family were the ones that were exterminating his own family in Spain, and his family was stuck in Spain. So negotiate with Catherine and perhaps manipulate Catherine to see his family brought to safety. Or how was he going to negotiate with the king, who had more power that could potentially, the king was very pro-Jewish actually, even though Jews were banned in England at the time. Henry secretly welcomed a whole lot of Jews to his realm for various economic reasons and cultural reasons. So could Vives then persuade Henry to allow the Jews that were being expelled from Spain and Portugal to have a safe home and be recognized in England? So there was a lot at stake, and negotiating that and not falling foul of any of those people was incredibly challenging. Eventually, without giving too much away, he was arrested by Henry, and I've written a lot of that detail into the novel. But really, in his day, in the Protestant countries, in the 1600s, 1700s, early 1800s, he was very, very well known. His books were published 100 times before the end of the 1600s, and his model for the education of an English woman became the model of that Elizabethan educated, cultured, demure woman. People, like Bess of Hardwick, or the cousins of Elizabeth I, Lettice Knollys, people like this. They would have been tutored at home. They weren't in schools as such, but they would have studied Vives, and him advocating for women knowing language and governance and grammar and astrology and all these areas that really had been the preserve of men till then. But I think, later on in England in the 1800s, his writing started to look a bit outdated and old-fashioned. We became very patriotic, very colonial. We wouldn't probably be supporting a Spaniard or a Jewish person as a hero, and so he just kind of fell off the radar. Yeah.
You clearly, I mean, obviously, if you're going to write a book like this, you have to know, because so the book is written like his, I mean, as the title would suggest, his personal diaries. And, he makes references to sort of writing in code because he has to be very careful about what he's saying. This could be discovered at any time. But there are at least 20, probably more, historical people that you've taken on as characters. Some obviously more integral to the book than others, and more prominent. But Vives, his voice, how did you go about developing, this is a first person narration, and not just a regular first person narration, but these are his private diaries. So how do you go about developing that and making it not just entertaining, for the, but how do you keep it true to who he was as best you can?
It's really interesting, and we're lucky with Vives. He left an awful lot of writing that has survived. Some bits of it haven't survived, and some bits have. And he writes dialogues. So in the Tudor schoolboy dialogues, he has about 24 scenes of what a schoolboy does. So getting up in the morning, getting ready for school, having breakfast, a journey to school, what happens in the first hour of school. And he writes that as it's conversations between schoolboys and their tutors. So you get a very strong sense of his voice, and his sense of humor comes across. One of the tutors is talking to one of the boys and saying, what are all those ants doing on your writing tablet? And the boy says, they're not ants, sir. And he says, well, mosquitoes then. What are the mosquitoes doing on your writing tablet? And he said, they're not mosquitoes. And the tutor says, so what are they? And the boy says, letters. That's my writing. And Vives says, well, your writing isn't good enough at this stage. So little anecdotes like this come across, and his pernicketyness about cleanliness and infection control. And it's quite interesting in these times that he advocated for the schoolboys to wash their hands 3 or 4 times a day in water that had been seeped in silver, because silver has that ability to kill infection. The colloidal silver has the ability to kill infection when you wash your hands with it. Wash your face every day with a clean face cloth. There were things like these little anecdotes that I picked up a sense of his voice, and how he would try and turn something into something really quite clever, and with a sense of humor. So I got a vague sense of what he was like, but also, he's a Spaniard, and I wanted to bring in that passion to be brought into it. And then it was just a case of learning everything that I'd learned, listening to Spanish radio and Spanish music and the music of the period, and then just kind of just like sinking into it and allowing myself to be quiet and just write and just having faith in what was coming through as I wrote, knowing that I wasn't Vives and that you know, of course, if he was up there looking at this, he'd thinking, my goodness, writing in my voice, this is, bearing that in mind, and it makes one feel that this kind of novel about such a great man, but if I hadn't, he would never have been brought forward into the narrative and we wouldn't be talking about him. So it was just really about learning everything that I could, having faith in what was coming through, learning all those you know, intricate details of his life story, and doing my best. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's
so it was
certainly entertaining.
But, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. I think I wanted to have that sense of humor. You know, terrible things are happening. People's families are being exterminated. People are dying of plague and famine. Catherine of Aragon doesn't know from one day to the next, you know, what's going to happen to her. Thomas More starts to fall foul of the king. So all this dark stuff is happening. But I feel you've got to have fun. You've got to have banter. You've got to have sense of humor. We know that Vives and Thomas More had this great banter. He had this great banter with Thomas More's daughter, Meg, and there's, you know, the sort of romance between the two characters written into the novel, and they both, we know they both admired themselves as great intellectuals, and so I really wanted to bring that fun element into the novel as well. Yeah.
I mean, I think you accomplished that. I don't know why this one part sticks out, but it was right after he met Henry VIII, and I can't remember what exactly he said, but afterwards, in his diary, he writes that he wanted to crawl under his covers, and that just made me laugh. And I think you've done a really good job of, you know, having this character feel you know, very human, which I don't know if that's the right word, but you know, I think a lot of historical narratives can fall into this. It feels more like you're reading about a person, and it's almost as if like you sort of lose the fact that these were real people. And you know, the fact that I, a person living in the 21st century, can connect in small ways to this person, not just in, you know, the fact that what he believed and what he advocated for was so wonderful, but also, you know, these very small human moments are just, it's truly very special what you've created.
Well, thank you. That's really lovely to hear. And I think if we do read these great men and women of the time, Margaret More, she left some great work. We are looking at them writing in that academic framework. We're not really getting too much of a sense of the human nature. But I have early on in the book, Vives saying that I'm human rather than humanist. Of course, he was a great humanist. But these people, they had the same feelings and drives that we have now, and relationships and desires, and sometimes those are desires towards somebody or something that actually is potentially harmful or damaging, or it goes against the cultural norm. He's married to someone from his faith and tradition, and yet he's attracted to somebody else, and he puzzles that, he wrestles with that, he struggles with it, and these are the way to bring in some of that drama and that prose, which with Vives it has to be slightly removed because he's always keeping his secret. Very, very good reasons, you know, during this was firing up, and wasn't just Spain. It was firing up through the Low Countries and Antwerp and Utrecht. People were to keep back writing, but I feel like I brought him forward in my writing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that you have. That's definitely something that, you know, you've succeeded at. So I wanted you to talk a little bit more about, and I'll have you pronounce the actual words because I don't want to butcher them. But the idea that of repairing the world, the duty to repair the world, because this is really a driving force for Vives through the entire novel. And so I'm assuming this is something that comes up in his writings, and that you've experienced during your research. And so I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that because I think it's so lovely.
I think that is an overriding theme throughout the work, and if you study Vives, you one gets the sense that there was some greater mission at play here, in the way that he challenges the Pope and tells the Pope what he requires of the Pope in terms of peace and stability. You know, he said to the Archbishop of Seville, "You can't really call yourself a Christian, can you, when you're advocating for persecution?" Very little on his mother's side. Father was more in business. The women came from the academic side, and this sense of repairing the world, tikkun olam, is a Hebrew concept that, you know, everything went bang, you know, in the creation, and our duty is then to, in what they call the tzimtzum, and then it is to repair that in tikkun olam, so bringing the chaos back into. And as a humanist, he felt that he had a role to play in this, and that he wasn't just going to the auspices of the church or of the nobility and aristocracy and monarchy. So I feel that driving him was this real sense that he had this opportunity to make the world a better place. And that might sound a little bit trite now, but in its day, that was quite revolutionary, and to even say such things risked you being arrested. But I feel the more I read about him, the more I feel that this bridge himself up through his association with monarchy. He gets himself into a position of power and authority where he's well known, and then he will start to be critical of them. Courage comes through once he's established himself in those positions where people will take notice of him. If he's really a low-level academic teacher to middle-class boys in Bruges, had he stayed there, you know, it's interesting, but nobody would really have taken notice. So he really climbed socially and networked. And then he had some power. And as we said, you know, we might not have heard of him, but he has changed things for the better, and his model of care of the poor became really widespread in the Low Countries and Germany, and even Thomas Cromwell, the subject of Hilary Mantel, tried to get poor laws passed in England, you know, and basically based on the model that Vives was advocating. And of course, in time, those things did get through. We did have schools for women, probably not until the 1700s, and I think America led the way with that very, very much. So yeah, he was prepared to put himself out there once he'd established himself at great risk for a greater good.
And you know, I was really taken with his bravery, you know, throughout the novel. I mean, obviously he's very intelligent, but this struggle that, you know, I found so moving was, you know, he's fighting for this greater good, but he, you know, he's a person himself, and he has a family, you know, who's also, you know, struggling, and, you know, that's at risk. And, you know, it's great tension in a novel, but to have this be someone that actually existed, and knowing that he, you know, he was so willing to speak to all these different authorities, and, you know, really push for these changes, and it's just so admirable. And I, you know, you know, that comes across beautifully in the novel as well. You've done so many things so wonderfully.
Yeah, well, he is my hero. He really is. You know, I've got a few heroes, but he really is up there with them. You know, I have the utmost respect and admiration for him, and I think that created the passion for me to continue writing the novel. You know, this is my first novel. I've written lots of other things, other papers, and I've always been a writer, but I, you know, never had those projects or publish anything. But he gave enough passion this regardless. You know, once I this, I felt that it was my duty.
So, you know, now that you've written this novel, I'm curious, do you plan to write another one? What's, you know, in store in the future? What can we look forward to seeing from you?
Well, wonderful news is I've actually got a literary agent who works in Paris. She's American, very, very really wonderful. So we are confident that we can get the book translated into several European languages. So definitely Spanish. It must go into to Spanish and also to French and other languages. And he lived in Belgium, Dutch and Flemish. So that's one thing that we're working on. But it's always been my goal to work of books. So what fascinates me is, especially in the Anglosphere, so the Vives was one that created the foundation that allowed for the legal resettlement of Jews in England in the 1650s. So I've actually written the first few chapters of another couple of books on characters who from a Sephardic Spanish Portuguese background who came to England, who again made great sacrifices for that greater good of trying to persuade the authorities to allow for the peaceful resettlement of Jewish people in England. And that was achieved in the 1650s. So I'm working up to that period with the next two books. But I feel the greater significance of that is, well, that opened the way that people of Jewish origin could then settle in North America, could then settle, you know, the United States and Canada when that split, in the Caribbean, here in Australia, New Zealand, other places where the English colonized. And of course, there's a whole backstory and, you know, political story about colonization. But without people like Vives and people that came later, perhaps Jewish people who fled from Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, might not have been able to settle into North America and England after the pogroms in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and then again, of course, after the Second World War. So I feel that this has a large Jewish, small Jewish population in South America. And thank goodness we had people like Vives and the other people that I'm going to write about that helped create a foundation to allow that to happen. So that's where I'm going with it.
Well, that sounds absolutely excellent. You know, I'm really excited to see what happens, what comes from you in the future. And I guess before we wrap up, you know, want to know what can a modern audience learn from Vives, and what do you hope that they take away from this book?
I think it's a sense that we don't come to this world we're in now where we have in developed countries universal education, where women can go to university and ascend the ranks, and also the situation where poor people are taken care of through education and through healthcare in most Western civilizations, that we do have doctors, and he was a great advocate for psychology. We have psychologists, we recognize mental health, post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction. These were things that Vives wrote about, but we don't come to this point now where we have those elements integrated in the management of good society for no reason. It was people that put themselves on the line to achieve that. And that many of the things that he was advocating for in the 1520s are so very relevant in the 2020s, 500 years now. And I feel that people can go backwards if we don't keep pushing forwards, and there's still work to be done on all those areas. So I hope that the modern reader can see that people he was one of the ones that laid a foundation for a better world that we're in now, but there's still work to do. There's still the repair of the world, the tikkun olam that never goes away.
Yes, that's so important. So thank you, Tim, so much for joining me today. This has been completely eye-opening, and for everyone watching, The Secret Diaries of Juan Luis Vives is out now, and you can get yourself a copy. And yes, so thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very, very much.